Retirement.
Retirement, with a very small R at the moment. So I'm no longer with the manufacturers, so they've just appointed a successor, so that's good.
So they found somebody to have a go at filling your shoes.
And I'm sure they'll do very well. And sort of I've been out of there now for just under a month. It was supposed to be a bit of retirement, but it hasn't worked out that way, so we keep going.
So what are you doing?
Well, basically minding my own businesses at the moment, so I'm focusing much more on the things I've been involved with in the past in a governance sense, but now more in a hands-on role.
So your name is still whispered in hushed tones in Parliament?
I doubt very much. Doubt very much.
So what is happening out there, John?
Well, I mean, you would have heard the Grant Spencer speech or heard of the Grant Spencer speech last Wednesday. Basically stirred up the problem around the Auckland housing market again. So it was that monetary policy needs mates. There's only so much the Reserve Bank can do. It's between that rock of low inflation and the hard place of rising asset prices, and doesn't really have the ability of itself to deal with everything with the tools it's got at the moment. So it's in that it has a screwdriver, it really needs a hammer sort of situation.
I mean, people keep saying about the Auckland housing market, and we're going to get more interest rates and God knows what. But is it really that strong?
Well, if you look at the average house prices to average wages, we've got one of the most overvalued markets in the world for property. And so that problem of people borrowing more and more in order to live in a house becomes a problem for the broader economy.
Is it a New Zealand thing that we have to own the house we sleep in?
Most of the English-speaking world has seen asset price inflation, and indeed that's been some of the pushback from the government, which says, John Key's asked, well, Grant Spencer's talking about capital gains tax. Mr. Key, what do you think? Oh, well, it's not really a good idea for all sorts of reasons. One of the major reactions is, well, Australia, the UK, North America's got a capital gains tax, and it's seen asset price inflation in property. So it isn't really fixed it. It's that comparative situation. There is no doubt that investing in land and buildings in New Zealand is advantageous from the tax viewpoint. So more money goes there, which would be okay if that's all that happened. But the knock-on problem is that we see a lift in the exchange rate, and that hurts all of us who make and sell stuff offshore.
I mean, the thing is far about asset capital gains tax. Labor sort of started to mumble about it, and it fell over and quivered and died.
Well, I've been mumbling about it for a long time. And it really comes back to that balanced economy. If we incentivize the wrong things or some things in the economy, the effort tends to go there. And if that's good for the whole economy, that's fine. But if it's only that part of the economy that benefits, we have an ongoing difficulty that we develop a one-legged economy, if you like.
Because, you know, seriously, it didn't make any traction, did it? And
no.
National just blew them out of water.
And right now, National has said we have no electoral mandate for capital gains tax, so we're not even going to talk about it. But the reality is, the deeper issues are it's distorting the economy, and one day we'll all pay for it.
Can it be made simple?
It can be absolutely simple. It can be capital gains tax on everything everywhere, no exceptions, but tends to get a little bit more complicated than that. It can be done. I mean, the people who argue it's complicated want to make it complicated because they're against it. The people who argue for it say it's simple because they're for it. But one thing's absolutely right, it takes a while to cut in. It's a future issue. So if I buy an asset today and sell it tomorrow for the same price, no tax. I sell it in 10 years' time for double the price, I'm taxed on that price increase. So that it does take time for capital gains to play through. But anticipation would alter the behaviour in the economy.
Would this mean that a lot of people are buying and selling houses and doing very well out of it and not paying tax?
Well, that means people are buying and selling houses and doing very well out of it and not paying tax. So the people who are paying tax are paying disproportionately more tax than they would otherwise do. So the load is carried elsewhere.
The dollar.
The dollar.
When's it going to come back and be realistic?
Well, that's the difficulty. The Reserve Bank, from the inflation standpoint, should be cutting the OCR. That would lower the currency. It can't cut the OCR because if it did, it puts more fire under the Auckland housing market. So it's between that, I've got a screwdriver, I need a hammer problem. And so there's discussion now about special reserve ratios influencing the banks on what they can lend on rental property, because people with 5, 6, 7 properties are vastly gearing up those properties, buying them in the Auckland market, taking the tax-free capital gain. That's lifting the price for everybody who's in the housing market.
Gearing up. That's scary.
It's very scary. Debt is a worry. Debt's a worry in the general structure of the world today. There's a lot of debt around. And I've said in the past that the debt is the things that worries me.
I mean, the 1980s, that big crash we had, that was because of people over-gearing for the stock exchange.
Well, the similar things are happening around the world now in terms of equities. Things are happening in the housing market. So if borrowing is cheap and gains are there to be had, people are leveraging up to go after those gains.
It's greed, John.
Well, in some cases, but it's financial behaviour. And people react to the rules that exist. So if you and I offered investment A versus investment B, and investment B is tax-free, where do we go?
Exactly. Internationally, briefly, what's
happening
internationally?
Well, you know, we've got Greece, we've got Europe, we've got China, we've got lots of difficulties in the global economy. So the in and out, or Grexit, the exit from the euro for Greece is there. The Chinese are seeing their own problems. They've loosened monetary policy recently because they are seeing some lower growth than they anticipated. That's bad for New Zealand, because China's now a very, very big international customer.
And Australia, because we're almost on a parity. How the hell did that happen?
Well, that's because the world sees New Zealand as being a better bet than Australia. So we're in commodities just like the Australians are in commodities, but the Australians tend to dig a hole in the ground. China really doesn't want steel, so that's a downward pressure on Australia. Still, even though the dairy auctions are off, there's still demand for dairy powder. It's seen as soft commodities rather than hard commodities. So that difference from a distance, New Zealand has seen stronger than Australia. Whether that's true and whether that can play through remains to be seen. But the big difference is the Reserve Bank of Australia is on a loosening bias. It's cut its OCR. It's talking about cutting it further. And so the international money pressure is showing up in New Zealand.
We could learn from that, couldn't we?
We could. And I've been talking for some time about the potential for an OCR cut. I think it's going to happen in probably the next or the one after monetary policy statement by the Reserve Bank. I think they're going to be driven to it.
Interesting times, John. You keep in touch, please. He's retired now, but of course that means that he's busier than ever, as anyone who's retired will know.